Rome, 80 AD. The Colosseum is packed, 50,000 spectators in complete silence, all eyes fixed on the arena. At that moment, a wild roar tears through the air. It's not a gladiator, it's a beast. Golden fur, killer eyes. An African lion, never before seen by the Romans, appears before the crowd. It wasn't just a fight. It was a message from the empire. In Rome, not only were lands conquered, nature itself was dominated. And in that instant, the arena of the Colosseum became the epicenter of absolute power. Would you dare to imagine what those Romans felt? Witnesses to a Rome that didn't just want to entertain, but to impress. And it did so through wild creatures torn from the farthest corners of the world, brought to die, to make the empire roar even louder. But this is just the beginning. If you think what you've seen so far is wild, wait until you meet animal number 6, one so unpredictable that even the Romans themselves didn't know whether it was going to kill or make them laugh. Stay with us, the best is yet to come. And don't forget to subscribe, because on this channel, we tell the uncomfortably epic story that documentaries dare not show. To understand what happened in the Colosseum, we need to go back a little in time. In Rome, the circus wasn't just a form of entertainment. It was an instrument of power, propaganda, and control. The emperors, in their desire to consolidate their rule over the vast empire, used gladiator and animal spectacles as a tool to show their strength and ability to subjugate not only peoples but also nature itself. Imagine you are a Roman citizen, sitting in the stands of the Colosseum. The sun shines above you while the emperor, from his box, watches with a satisfied smile as the wild creatures face off. It wasn't just a spectacle. It was a constant reminder that Rome was in control of everything, the lands, the peoples, and even the fiercest creatures on the planet. What the people saw wasn't just a macabre form of entertainment, it was a clear message: look at what we've brought, look at how far our power reaches. Neither gods nor monsters can challenge Rome. The animals that stepped onto that sand weren't just wild beasts, they were symbols of the absolute power of the Roman Empire. The lion, known as the Beast of Africa, wasn't just an animal in the Colosseum's arena. For the Romans, it represented something much bigger. When a lion was seen for the first time in the arena, it was like witnessing a living legend. Golden fur, a mane that looked like fire, and cold, merciless eyes. There was no creature more imposing than him. The roar of that lion wasn't just a sound, it was a punch to the chest, a statement that Rome ruled the world. The lions were brought from the distant lands of Ethiopia, Libya, or Morocco. Caught alive, placed in reinforced wooden cages, and transported all across the Mediterranean. The journey was long, dangerous, and deadly for them. Many died before they arrived, but those who survived, famished and furious, reached the Colosseum ready to wreak havoc on anything in their path. When the lion was released into the arena, it didn't just face gladiators or slaves. The lion was the power of Rome, the spectacle was just a reflection of the strength that the empire showed to the world. Watching a lion attack wasn't barbarity. No, in Rome, it was civilization, it was the absolute power of an empire that dominated nature. But if the lion was the king, the elephants were the true titans. Imagine what the Romans felt when they saw one of these gigantic creatures enter the arena. They weren't just animals. They were living monuments. Huge, silent, with a gaze so human that it made the spectators question whether they were seeing a beast or a divine punishment. The elephants were brought from the jungles of Central Africa or even from India, traveling thousands of kilometers by sea and land. The journey was not only long but suicidal for any creature of their size. Some didn't survive the journey, but those who did, were received as monsters from another world. In the Colosseum, the elephants were not treated with reverence but with cruel humiliation. Some fought against gladiators armed with spears and torches. Others were made to face each other, while the audience watched frantically. In the worst cases, they were used for public executions, where, with their powerful trunks, they would lift prisoners and crush them slowly, while the crowd cheered with every crack. Rome didn't see these colossi as a wonder of nature. They saw them as a tool, another way to show their power, their absolute dominion over everything, even the most majestic creatures. But if the lion was the dominant beast and the elephant the titan, there was one creature that represented another kind of power, the crocodile. This animal, which neither roared nor made any noise, was enough to see it sliding across the sand for the audience to feel a chill run down their spine. It was pure fear, nature's wildness in its most terrifying form. The crocodiles arrived from the waters of the Nile, captured by expert slaves who risked their lives to catch them. They were not easy animals to handle. A single twist of their jaw could tear off your leg, and that is why the Romans treated them with extreme caution. They were placed in wooden boxes with mud and stagnant water, enduring long and foul sea journeys. Once they arrived at the Colosseum, they were released onto the stage, sometimes in artificial lagoons that recreated the Nile Delta, and other times in mock naval battles. The crocodiles, uncontrollable, slid between unarmed slaves or fought in the water, causing unstoppable violence. No one knew if they would attack humans, other animals, or simply unleash chaos. What fascinated the Romans about crocodiles was not only their ability to kill, but their unpredictable nature. For the Romans, it was a display of what the empire could bring, not only monsters, but creatures that defied any attempt at control. Among all the wild creatures that stepped onto the Colosseum floor, there was one that defied all logic, the hippopotamus. With its fat body and friendly face, it seemed like a joke of nature, but don't be deceived. This creature was a demon disguised as a sack of flesh, capable of destroying a chariot with a simple snap of its jaw. The Romans, who were surprised to see such imposing animals, didn't know how to react when they saw a hippopotamus. Some laughed at its appearance, but soon they learned that its bad temper was more lethal than any beauty in the arena. They brought them from the Blue Nile, and the capture process was so risky that many slaves didn't survive. Catching a hippopotamus was not just a matter of strength but of patience and strategy. At the Colosseum, the hippopotamus was released to face gladiators or even other animals. Its unpredictable behavior made the show completely chaotic. Sometimes it attacked its opponents, other times it charged towards the stands, chasing Romans as far as possible. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or simply hide. The brutality of its nature was the spectacle that Rome expected. Seeing a hippopotamus destroy everything in its path was not only a display of power but of absolute control. And in Rome, nothing demonstrated their power more than a beast that didn't follow the rules. If the hippopotamus defied expectations, giraffes and rhinos were creatures that left the audience completely baffled. The first giraffe to step into the Colosseum was met with absolute silence. Not out of fear, but out of astonishment. With its long legs, endless neck, and graceful movements, the giraffe seemed out of place in this world. The Romans, who had never seen anything like it, called it a leopard camel, because they didn't know whether it was a deformed horse or an experiment of the gods. Julius Caesar was the first to bring a giraffe to Rome as an exotic gift, but it wasn't always about admiration. Sometimes they used it as a symbol of luxury, parading it like a living jewel. Other times, however, the story was much crueler. They would place it in the middle of the show, surrounded by beasts, or use it for mockery, dressing it with dwarfs as ridiculous riders. But the giraffe wasn't the only creature that baffled the Romans. The rhinoceros, with its thick, impenetrable skin, was feared by all. The Romans believed its skin was so strong that even arrows couldn't penetrate it. Some considered it a sacred beast, sent by the desert gods. But in the arena, this animal wasn't a god, but a destruction machine. Brought from India or sub-Saharan Africa, its journey was deadly. But once in Rome, its power was undeniable. Imagine seeing a rhinoceros face off against an elephant, like two living tanks, colliding with all their strength in a fight for supremacy. The ground would shake, the crowd would go wild, and the emperor would smile. These animals were more than just beasts, they were the spectacle, the demonstration that Rome could dominate even the wildest creatures. But it wasn't just the giant and exotic creatures that dominated the arena. Bears, with their fierce brutality, also had their place in the Colosseum. In Rome, bears were not just wild animals. They were symbols of strength, of untamable nature, something that, despite being captured and domesticated, still carried a spark of the wild within them. Hunters in the mountains of Europe revered them as gods, but in the arena, that respect turned into a macabre spectacle. Bears were captured when young and trained to fight, not only against gladiators but also against other animals like wolves or wild boars. Some bears, incredibly, earned the admiration of the audience for their ferocity and skill, but this apparent domestication didn't remove the wildness from their nature. A wounded bear could tear apart the cage that contained it, wreaking havoc in its path, and the Romans knew this. In fact, some of the most legendary fights in the Colosseum were led by these animals. Once, a bear broke its chains and charged directly at the emperor, forcing an emergency evacuation. The crowd froze, but that tension only fueled the animal's legend. For the Romans, the bear represented the perfect balance between the wild and the domesticated. It was a constant reminder that, no matter how much they tried to control nature, it could always break free at any moment. In the Colosseum, gladiators didn't just fight each other, they also faced beasts. The bond between men and animals in the arena was more complex than it seemed. Both gladiators and beasts were victims of the same system. They were pieces in a spectacle created to satisfy the bloodlust of an audience hungry for power, violence, and control. Gladiators, trained to fight in the arena, did not only fight for their lives against other men. Sometimes, their fate was to face wild animals brought from the farthest corners of the empire. They were the final barrier between nature and man, between the beast and the spectator. But they were also symbols of the glory of Rome. Their bravery represented not only the struggle for survival but also the reaffirmation of Rome's power over all creatures of the world. The animals, for their part, were not just adversaries. They were symbols of what the empire could dominate. The fight between a gladiator and a lion, for example, was more than a fight. It was a spectacle of power, a way to show that Rome feared nothing, not even the wildest forces of nature. But these spectacles were not just a matter of entertainment or showcasing Rome's power. The emperors understood that the circus was also a political tool. In a society where the stability of the empire relied heavily on the satisfaction of the masses, the spectacles at the Colosseum were much more than simple games. They were a means to distract the people from real problems, to divert their attention from the political and social crises threatening Rome. Panem et circenses, as they said, was the formula that kept the people content and the emperor in power. While the Romans delighted in the spilled blood and the fight between men and beasts, the emperor strengthened his image as a strong and capable leader. He not only controlled the land but also controlled the hearts and minds of his people. Exotic animals, bloody fights, and the grandeur of these events served as a constant reminder that Rome not only ruled the known world but also nature itself. Everything in the Colosseum was carefully orchestrated to ensure that the emperor remained at the center of power, and that the beasts, gladiators, and the Roman people were at the service of a single idea: the supremacy of the empire. But behind every spectacle in the Colosseum, behind every roar and bloody fight, a crucial question arises: were these animals really treated as heroes in the arena, or simply as tools to satisfy the darker desires of the empire? The Romans, in their eagerness to demonstrate their power over nature, stopped at nothing. Capturing these wild beasts, transporting them in inhumane conditions, and throwing them into the arena to fight to the death was not only entertainment, but also a demonstration of absolute control. The animals were forced to fight, many died before arriving, and those who survived did so barely with enough strength to be part of a violent display. What is most shocking is that, for many spectators, seeing the suffering of these animals was not just part of the spectacle but proof of the greatness of Rome. It was not just about the fight, it was about the public humiliation of nature itself. And while the crowd cheered, the question lingered in the air: were these animals truly part of an epic spectacle, or simply victims of a ruthless system that used them for its own benefit? The spectacles at the Colosseum not only left a mark on the animals and gladiators but also on Roman society as a whole. Seeing these wild creatures fight to the death, witnessing the brutality of the battles, fueled a culture of fascination with violence and absolute power. For the Romans, the Colosseum became a mirror of their own identity, a society that glorified conquest, strength, and sacrifice. These events were a direct manifestation of the values that sustained the empire: supremacy, control, and the ability to dominate everything, even the wildest forces of nature. But there was also a price. In a society where both human and animal life had little value in the arena, brutality became an accepted norm. The Romans grew up seeing these spectacles as part of their daily lives, and with each roar, with each battle, the idea was reinforced that violence was the way to maintain order and control. The spectacle not only fed the thirst for blood but also kept the people distracted from the darker realities of the empire, creating a culture where life and death were stripped of their human value. Today, thousands of years after the last roar echoed in the Colosseum, we can still see the remnants of these spectacles. The Colosseum still stands, a symbol not only of Rome's greatness but also of its excesses. Every stone, every crack tells the story of an empire that not only conquered peoples but also subdued nature itself. And while today we see the Colosseum as an architectural wonder, there is something unsettling in its history. The Roman people, who marveled at the spectacle, never imagined that the same creatures used for their entertainment would be part of the legacy of an empire that, through its violence, sought to leave an indelible mark. Today, the Colosseum bears witness to millions of tourists who visit it, but behind each selfie and photo, there is a much darker story, a Rome that dominated not only man but everything that stood in its way. The Colosseum remains a reminder of an era where brutality was not only accepted but celebrated. When we look back at those spectacles in the Colosseum, we're not just observing cruel entertainment, but also a reflection of human ambition. Rome didn't just want to conquer lands and peoples, it wanted to show that it ruled everything, from nature to the gods themselves. The animals, the gladiators, the spilled blood, everything was part of a power game, a spectacle where brutality became a display of civilization. But the real question is, what does all of this say about our own nature? The Romans used beasts to teach lessons about control and domination. Yet, in the end, what they were truly controlling was their own humanity. Because behind every roar, behind every confrontation, there was a deeper, more uncomfortable lesson: true power does not lie in domination, but in recognizing the forces that cannot be controlled. Rome may have conquered the world, but it could not control what truly matters. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Colosseum left us. No matter how great or fierce the empire, in the end, what endures is not the power, but the humanity behind it. What do you think of these spectacles? Do you believe the Romans really controlled nature, or did they simply use it for their own entertainment? Let us know your opinion in the comments and share this video if you want to learn more about ancient Rome. If this fact surprised you, don't forget to subscribe, because on this channel, we unearth the most epic stories, the ones you wouldn't dare to believe. See you in the next video.